Good morning. The hearing will come to order. Welcome to this committee's third hearing on the subject of skyrocketing food and energy prices. In the last two hearings, we've focused on the role of financial speculators to determine if their increasing participation in the commodity markets is a cause of rising food and fuel prices. Evidence presented to this committee has persuaded me that speculators are, in fact, a significant contributing factor to the economic distress now being felt by American consumers every time they stand in the grocery store checkout line or pay for a fill-up at the gas pump. That distress obviously is being also felt in many ways by American businesses, small and large. That's why at the end of our last hearing, Senator Collins and I asked our staffs to draft legislation that might address this problem. Last week we made those drafts public, posted them on the committee website, and solicited public comment. Today we're going to take testimony on these draft proposals, which we hope and believe can bring relief to American family and business budgets. Since we initiated this inquiry nearly 2 months ago, a lot has happened on this subject and with this problem. The CFTC itself has announced at least 4 new initiatives to address speculative activity. And last week, the chief executive of the New York Stock Exchange said that investments by large institutional investors, particularly pension funds, were completely altering the supply and demand for commodities. Our colleagues here in Congress have introduced at least 8 bills on this subject, most of them focusing on market transparency. But some go further by seeking to bring foreign or over-the-counter markets under federal regulation. Concern about speculation in commodity markets and its impact on prices is not confined to the United States. At the recent G8 meeting, a number of our closest allies and trading partners, particularly France, Italy, and Japan, raised this concern. And in fact, the final G8 statement from that meeting asks national authorities, and I quote, to examine the functioning of commodity futures markets and to take appropriate measures as needed, end of quote. Austria has proposed a European-wide tax on commodity speculators. And a report recently released by the International Monetary Fund concluded that, quote, speculation has played a significant role in the run-up in oil prices as the U.S. dollar has weakened and investors have looked for a hedge in oil futures, parenthesis, in gold, end of quote. So what we are doing here today is not in isolation and not without very credible support. The 3 draft discussion documents Senator Collins and I made public last week would, 1, extend transparency to unregulated commodity markets by closing the so-called swaps loophole. 2, create a seamless system of speculative position limits that would apply to all commodity trading on the exchanges, over the counter, and on foreign exchanges. And 3, restrict commodity investments by large institutional investors that invest through index funds. And I want to stress that that draft possible legislative proposal would restrict commodity investments by large institutional investors only so far as they invest through index funds. I want to be clear that when I talk about financial speculators, I'm talking about those looking to commodity price appreciation or depreciation to generate profits. Increasingly left on the sidelines are bona fide hedgers, the farmers, the fuel oil dealers, and others for whom the commodity markets were originally created as a way to reduce their risk by locking in prices on next year's crops or oil production. Let me also be clear that I understand that some speculation in commodity markets helps them function, but the speculation going on now has gone way beyond that. One of the public comments we received through the committee website is, I think, particularly insightful and instructive. It came from a commodity broker in Iowa, and it reads like this, quote, "I have seen firsthand the effect that these index funds have had on the agricultural markets. My customers are farmers, and they're getting tired of not being able to make sense of the markets. Although they're happy with the price of grains, almost to a man they will tell you that prices are too high. With these high prices, the price of their inputs has gone up as well, i.e. land, rent, fertilizer, seed, etc. To my customers," this Iowa commodity broker says, "the fundamentals of supply and demand mean nothing anymore. These index funds and exchange-traded funds are not living by the same rules that the CFTC sets up for speculators. They need to be made to come into compliance with the speculative limit the rest of the market participants have to abide by," end of quote. That's real common sense from the heartland, and I think that voice of that commodity broker from Iowa is one that we should keep in mind as we consider what Congress can and should do about this legislation and this problem. I also want to say, and I think it's important to say, that speculation in the food and fuel futures markets is not illegal. But that doesn't mean that it's not very hurtful. To paraphrase a character in an early 20th century political novel, speculators are just seeing their opportunities and taking them. Motivated by the weakness of the dollar and rising demand for oil and food, speculators are moving enormous amounts of money into commodities markets for the obvious purpose of making more money. But in so doing, they are artificially inflating the price of food and fuel futures and causing real financial suffering for millions and millions of people and businesses. The steady upward climb of the cost of food and energy in recent months is not simply the result of natural market forces at work. Speculation has passed the point where it provides stability to the commodity markets. It is now excessive and has consequences that are very, very harmful. And that's why I believe our government must step in as soon as possible to protect our consumers and our economy, because against the forces that are raising the cost of food and fuel, the average person simply cannot protect himself or herself. Senator Collins.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this critically important hearing this morning. High energy costs are having a devastating impact on our economy and on our people, especially people in large, cold, rural states like Maine. Truck drivers, small business owners, fishermen, farmers, and countless others are struggling with the high cost of oil and gasoline. In Maine, where 80% of our homes are heated with oil, many families simply do not know how they are going to cope with the record high cost of heating oil this coming winter. For many of them, it is truly a crisis. The high cost of energy is also taking a toll on businesses throughout our nation. For example, the paper mill in Millinocket, Maine, recently announced that it would be closing down because it is no longer profitable due to the cost of oil. If this occurs, the community will be devastated by the loss of more than 200 good jobs. What is troubling to me is that the harmful spike in energy costs does not appear to be caused solely by supply and demand factors, as the chairman has pointed out. Compelling evidence gathered by this committee suggests that excessive speculation in futures markets is also a significant factor pushing up the price of oil. The increased cost of energy certainly reflects fundamentals, including the increased demand from China and India and the depreciation of the dollar. But massive new holdings of oil futures contracts by pension funds, university endowments, and other institutional investors who neither produce nor take delivery of oil also appear to be driving up prices. Their intentions may be simply to provide good returns and investment diversification, but many experts believe their activities are distorting commodity markets and pushing prices upward. I'm pleased to be working with Chairman Lieberman once again to write legislation that will help our nation, this time by preventing excessive speculation in energy and agricultural commodity markets. And I commend the chairman for his far-sighted leadership. I do have serious concerns about one major provision in the draft legislation, and that is the proposed ban on institutional investors using index funds to trade in the commodity futures markets. While I believe that the influx of money from pension funds, university endowments, and other institutional investors has had a detrimental impact on prices, prohibiting their investment risks harming current and future retirees. After all, pension fund managers are investing in commodities as a way to diversify their holdings, hedge against inflation, and improve returns, all in keeping with their fiduciary obligations. In my judgment, an outright ban would have unintended consequences for retirees relying on these pension funds. That does not mean, however, that I do not believe that reforms are called for. I do. Senator Lieberman has proposed other policy options to address the effects of excessive speculation that make a great deal of sense to me. These proposals would limit the percentage of total contract holdings that non-commercial investors could maintain in any one commodity market, and would close the swaps loophole that currently allows financial institutions to evade position limits intended to prevent an investor from cornering a market. As we identify and evaluate these and other policy options, we obviously must take care not to cripple the usefulness of futures markets for the producers, handlers, and purchasers of commodities who need to lock in prices, hedge risks, and see clues for price trends. There are two other issues that are of critical importance and concern to me. The first is dark markets, and the second is resources for the Commodities Futures Trading Commission. There are still gaps in publicly available data to track the effect of speculation on prices. Price manipulation, I fear, could go undetected on certain markets because they lack regulation or because trades are not adequately disclosed to regulators. This is why I have called for increased regulation and transparency in futures markets to guard against excessive speculation and price manipulation. And it's why I, along with the chairman, Senator Levin, was a leader on this, in closing the Enron loophole for electronic exchanges. A related concern is ensuring that the CFTC has the resources it needs to collect and analyze data, monitor trading, and police markets. The Commission's chairman recently testified that the trading volume of commodities futures contracts and options has soared from 37 million back in 1976 to more than 3 billion contracts last year. Yet today there are fewer employees at the Commission than there were in 1976, leaving much more work for far fewer staff. With Senator Lieberman's support, I hope to include provisions in our comprehensive bill that will rectify this resource shortcoming. Beyond lacking sufficient resources, I believe the Commission has been less than aggressive in using its existing authorities To be fair, the Commission deserves credit for its recent investigation into market activity, its stronger data sharing agreement with British authorities, and its withdrawal of proposed rules to raise speculative position limits on agricultural commodities. But I would have felt better if the Commission had taken these actions more proactively rather than in response to prodding from lawmakers and public opinion. As usual, we must perform a careful balancing act, not simply for the abstract goal of market efficiency, but for the concrete goal of easing hardship for real people who are struggling with inflated food and energy costs. I welcome our panel of witnesses, and I thank them for helping us evaluate our policy options. Working together, I'm confident that this committee can develop effective measures to curb excessive speculation, guard against price manipulation, and protect consumers who are suffering from high food and energy prices. And again, Mr. Chairman, thank you for your leadership on this vitally important issue.
Thanks very much, Senator Collins, for the thoughtful statement, even the part in which you disagreed with one of my proposals. This is probably good because it will prove, contrary to public belief, that you and I don't agree on everything.
This is true.
And we will reason together, as we always do, on that. I thank the members of the committee who are here. I particularly want to do, as I did last hearing, thank Senator Levin, who really was way ahead of the rest of us in focusing on this issue, this problem that we're focused on now. I think Senator Coleman worked with them at some point along the way as well, and so their work is a preface to what we've done. I also want to welcome Senator Isaacson, not a member of the committee, but asked if he could sit on in the hearing, and we're delighted to have him here. We'll go right to the witnesses now. I thank you for being here. I believe that there's a vote tentatively scheduled for 11:15, so we'll try to move as quickly as we can and maybe rotate our departures to vote so we can keep the hearing going. First witness is Walter Lucan, acting chairman of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. Mr. Lucan was appointed acting chairman in June of last year, but has served as a CFTC commissioner since 2002, and he currently serves on the Commission's Energy Markets Advisory Committee. Thank you for being here. Mr. Lucan, we welcome your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Other distinguished members, I appreciate being here today to testify on the role of excessive speculation in the futures markets. During the last few years, the futures markets have changed dramatically in both size and products and complexity, experiencing 500% growth in both volume and products listed. Today's exchanges are technology-driven corporations that trade electronically 24 hours a day all around the globe. Approximately $5 trillion of notional transactions flow through these U.S. exchanges every day. This description alone would make the oversight of these markets a challenge for regulators, but add to it the subprime crisis, record energy and commodity prices, the influx of financial funds into the futures markets, and historic low staffing levels at the CFTC, and it is clear that these are challenging times for this agency. Recent substantial increases in the price of crude oil have put considerable strain on U.S. households. These issues are a matter of intense focus at the Commission due to the key role that futures markets play in the price discovery of these products. The CFTC recognizes that these markets and their participants have evolved significantly in the last several years. Concerns have been raised about the role of speculators and index traders in these markets. As prices have escalated, the CFTC has pursued an active agenda to ensure that the commodity futures markets are operating free of distortion. These initiatives fall into 5 broad categories. 1, increasing information and transparency. 2, ensuring proper market controls. 3, continuing aggressive enforcement efforts. 4, improving oversight coordination. And 5, seeking increased funding. The proper oversight of markets requires transparency. Market regulators must receive the necessary information to surveil the markets, study long-term financial trends, and evaluate policy changes as circumstances evolve. The backbone of the CFTC's market surveillance program is its large trader reporting system. All large traders must file daily with the CFTC their futures and options positions in the markets. This information enables the CFTC's surveillance economists to oversee all traders of size to ensure that no one is attempting to manipulate these markets. As markets have become electronic and global, the CFTC has been working to expand its trade data collection to accommodate these trends. On May 29th, the CFTC announced an agreement with the UK FSA to greatly expand on the trader data already received from ICE Futures Europe on its linked crude oil contract that settles off the NYMEX crude oil benchmark, including receiving equivalent daily large trader reports on all months traded. This cross-border information sharing is unprecedented among global regulators. The CFTC has also taken action to improve the transparency of index traders and swap dealers in the energy markets. In late May, the CFTC announced that it would use its special call authorities to gather more detailed data from swap dealers on the amount of index trading in the markets and to examine whether index traders are being properly classified for regulatory and reporting purposes. These information requests have been sent, and the CFTC expects in the coming weeks to begin receiving more detailed information on index traders in the markets and that are being conducted through swap dealers. After analyzing this data, the CFTC will provide a report to Congress by September 15th regarding the scope of index trading coming into the markets and recommendations for improved practices and controls should they be required. Beginning last fall and finalized last month, the Commission worked with Congress to enact legislation as part of the Farm Bill requiring exempt commercial markets that trade linked energy contracts to provide the CFTC with large trader reports and impose position accountability and position limits on these products. Congress and this agency believed that these authorities were necessary to protect the regulated energy marketplace. As noted earlier, linkages between contracts are not purely a domestic occurrence, but happen across borders. Most energy and agricultural commodities are global commodities operating in a global marketplace, and the U.S. futures markets have been facing the challenges of cross-border trading and regulation for many years. For more than a decade, the CFTC has utilized its mutual recognition process for foreign exchanges that allows U.S. institutions access to those markets by striking a balance between protecting the U.S. regulated marketplace and the acknowledgement that increased globalization of commodity markets requires international cooperation and coordination between governments. With this balance in mind, last week the CFTC announced modifications to its Foreign Board of Trade process. After consultation with the British FSA, the CFTC revised the access letter of ICE Futures Europe to require the implementation of position limits and accountability levels on its linked crude oil contracts. The CFTC will also require other foreign exchanges that seek such direct access to provide the CFTC with large trader reports and to impose position and speculative limits on those products. This combination of enhanced information data and additional market controls will help the CFTC in its surveillance of its regulated domestic exchanges while preserving the benefits of its mutual recognition program. During these turbulent economic times, the environment is ripe for those who want to illegally manipulate the markets. In late May, the Commission took the extraordinary step of disclosing that since December 2007, its Division of Enforcement has launched a nationwide crude oil investigation into practices surrounding the purchase, storage, trading, and transportation of crude oil products and their related derivative contracts. Strong enforcement is imperative during this time. Given the CFTC's size and complexity, given the CFTC's size and the enormity of the global marketplace, the CFTC must also engage others in government as we seek to meet our important mission. 2 weeks ago, the CFTC announced the formation of an interagency task force to evaluate developments in the commodity markets, which includes staffs from the CFTC, the Federal Reserve, the Department of Treasury, the SEC, Department of Energy, Department of Agriculture. I have also invited the FTC and FERC to participate as well, given their expertise in these related energy matters. The task force is intended to bring the best and brightest minds in government together to study these issues so we understand how the markets are functioning. If it sounds busy, it is, especially given the agency's staffing records are near record low numbers. Since the CFTC opened its doors 33 years ago, the volume on futures exchange, as Senator Collins mentioned, has grown 8,000%, while our staffing levels have decreased 12%. As the agency embarks on new authorities and initiatives in order to respond to changing market conditions, it is imperative that these be met with adequate resources. The CFTC is in the midst of implementing the new Farm Bill authorities that were led by Senator Levin and others on this committee, which require many programmatic changes in our legislation and just plain old hard work from a staff that's already under considerable strain. Additionally, the agency staff is racing to implement the measures that I've outlined earlier in my testimony. Recall as well that our employees are full-time regulators charged with overseeing these markets each and every day. Without proper funding, the agency will not be able to sustain this pace for much longer. In summary, the Commission shares this committee's concern for the current market conditions in the energy markets and for the high price of crude oil and gas on consumers, workers, and businesses. These are difficult economic times, and the Commission recognizes the need to respond accordingly to ensure the futures markets are working properly for all Americans. Thank you very much, and I welcome any questions you may have.
Chairman Lucan, thanks for your testimony. I must tell you that I'm disappointed that nowhere in your opening statement have you responded to the request that Senator Collins and I made in our letter of invitation to the witnesses, which is to offer comment on the 3 draft proposals that we've made. I'm going to ask you about that in the question period. I also must say that I hear that you've acted against the manipulation, but I don't hear any recognition from you that speculation is a problem. And I understand you're busy, but most of the busyness that you've described sounds to me like study instead of action that will bring relief, because this is a crisis in the real lives of people in this country every day. Senator Collins and I happen to be from New England. We're thinking a lot about the cost of home heating oil this winter. And I just think the administration, Congress, we've got to get together, decide where the problem is, and act quickly, because the problem is urgent. And I believe that we have the power to offer relief, and shame on us if we don't. So I'll come back to that in the question period. Next witness is Dr. James E. Newsom, President, CEO, and member of the board of NYMEX Holdings, parent of the New York Mercantile Exchange, which is the main American exchange for trading in oil futures. He's been at the exchange since August 2004. Prior to that, Dr. Newsom served as chairman of the CFTC beginning in December of 2001, and before that was a CFTC commissioner. In addition, Dr. Newsom serves on the board of the Dubai Mercantile Exchange, the Canadian Resource Exchange, the National Futures Association, and the Institute for Financial Markets. Thanks for being here, Dr. Newsom. We welcome your testimony now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. NYMEX is fully regulated as a derivatives clearing organization and a designated contract market, which is the highest and most comprehensive level of regulatory oversight for a trading facility. My comments today in this oral testimony are only as it relates to NYMEX markets and not to foreign boards of trade or over-the-counter markets. The ever-increasing cost of energy touches all aspects of our daily lives, and today it is quite possibly the most important issue facing both global and domestic economies. The Commodity Futures Modernization Act of 2000 ushered in a period of phenomenal growth in derivatives markets. The CFMA has proven to be the gold standard of U.S. financial policy. For the most part, the value and success of the CFMA holds true today. However, neither the Congress nor the CFTC possessed a crystal ball, and it was impossible at that time to determine how some markets would develop. In at least 2 instances, markets have developed differently than anyone could have anticipated at the time. First, that an over-the-counter natural gas contract trading on an unregulated exempt commercial market could mirror an exchange-traded natural gas contract, and that the 2 contracts could become very closely linked. Ultimately, the OTC contract began to serve a price discovery function. Market participants could and did easily move positions from the regulated exchange to the ECM to avoid regulatory requirements such as position limits. This scenario was investigated by the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, chaired by Senator Levin, and was addressed effectively in an amendment to the recently adopted Farm Bill. Second, foreign boards of trade began offering futures contracts with U.S. delivery points to U.S. customers pursuant to CFTC no-action letters. Historically, foreign exchanges were permitted to offer direct access to their markets to U.S. customers based on a determination by CFTC staff that the foreign regulatory regime governing foreign boards of trade was comparable to that of the CFTC. This approach worked very effectively until a foreign board of trade listed the look-alike of the NYMEX West Texas Intermediate crude oil futures contract without the level of transparency and market surveillance controls, such as position limits, that are required on U.S. regulated markets. It was never anticipated that the no-action process would be used in this manner. NYMEX has suggested for 2 years that foreign boards of trade offering linked products should be required by the CFTC to provide the same level and quality of data and at the same frequency that U.S. exchanges provide to the CFTC. In addition, we believe that no-action letters for foreign boards of trade offering contracts with U.S. delivery points should be conditioned to impose position limits and/or accountability levels. And we appreciate the fact that the CFTC announced last week to do just that. Much has been said recently regarding the role of speculators in energy markets. Speculative activity on U.S. regulated futures exchanges is managed effectively by position limits. For the NYMEX WTI crude contract, the position limit during the last 3 days of the expiring delivery month is 3,000 contracts. Breaching that position limit can result in disciplinary action being taken by the exchange. Many believe that speculators, particularly index funds and other large institutional investors in our markets, are responsible for the high price of crude oil. Data from NYMEX confirms non-commercials are relatively balanced between long and short open positions for NYMEX crude oil futures. Thus, non-commercials are simply not providing disproportionate pressure on either the buy side or the sell side of the crude oil market. In fact, since October 2007, swaps dealers in the NYMEX crude oil markets have been holding overall net short positions. Thus, any price impact attributable to swaps dealers would be to lower prices, not to raise them. Questions are being raised as to whether hedge exemptions for swaps dealers that are being used by index funds and other institutional investors as a means of circumventing speculative position limits. The full extent of participation by swaps dealers, as well as what, if any, influence they are having on current market prices and volatility, cannot be determined without accurate data. NYMEX believes that more precise data are needed to better assess the amount and impact of this type of trading, and NYMEX fully supports the further delineation of this data in the CFTC Large Trader Report. In addition, we continue to believe that market fundamentals are the most important factor in the current market. Uncertainty in this jittery, very tight global crude market regarding geopolitical uncertainty, refinery and deepwater well sabotage and shutdowns, decreasing production by non-OPEC producers, and increasing global demand, as well as devaluation of the U.S. dollar, are clearly having an impact on the assessment of market fundamentals. In futures markets, margins function as financial performance bonds and are used to manage financial risk and to ensure financial integrity, not to control volume flow. Adjusting margin levels significantly upward will not change the underlying market fundamentals, but instead will force trading volume away from the regulated and transparent U.S. exchanges into less regulated or even unregulated opaque markets. A number of legislative initiatives have been proposed that are intended to respond to perceived problems of excessive speculation in the markets. NYMEX reiterates that it is important to collect the data in order to accurately assess the activity and influence of speculative activity before adopting a legislative solution. Futures markets like NYMEX are messengers carrying price information from the energy industry to the public. It would be contrary to the public interest to adopt legislation that impairs the important price discovery function of these markets. Another legislative proposal would prohibit certain institutional investors, such as pension funds, from investing in agricultural and energy commodities on U.S. futures exchanges, foreign exchanges, or over-the-counter markets. NYMEX believes that prohibiting investment opportunities of institutional market participants effectively substitutes the judgment of Congress for the judgment of trained financial investment professionals. Moreover, we believe that the case has not yet been made to support a finding that institutional investors are contributing to the high prices of crude oil. It would be premature to adopt a legislative solution for an unproven and unsubstantiated problem. Mr. Chairman, while we may not be in agreement on all the issues before this committee, we are in complete agreement that there is a need for full transparency in a competitive marketplace, and we are also firm believers that position limits should be used across the marketplace in order to control speculative activity.
Thanks, Dr. Newsom. Incidentally, Senator Collins and I invited witnesses who we assumed would be against some of the proposals because we want to air them out because we have a sense of urgency about it, actually introducing these as legislation sometime after the recess for July 4th next week. So this is really our opportunity, positively or negatively, to influence what we want to do. Next witness is Michael Masters, here for his second command performance before this committee. Mr. Masters is an accomplished hedge fund founder and manager who has researched the effect of speculators, particularly those operating in over-the-counter markets outside the scope of the CFTC's jurisdiction. And I'll just say that I didn't know Mr. Masters before we asked him to testify. I have a friend who sent me an email and said, I met this guy Masters, Michael Masters, and he's smart, he understands financial markets, and he really feels strongly that speculation on the commodity markets is a big part of the reason for the increase in the price of fuel and food. You ought to meet him. That's how it started, and I appreciate what you brought forth, and we look forward to your testimony now. I don't think so. I don't think it started, Senator Warner, but we'll watch it. Thanks. Mr. Masters, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Chairman Lieberman, Ranking Member Collins, and members of this committee, distinguished guests, for the opportunity to testify today. I especially want to thank the two of you for your exemplary bipartisan leadership on this issue. I very much appreciate your balanced approach of taking the time to thoroughly understand these issues and then acting in a decisive manner to solve them. Commodities futures markets exist solely for the benefit of bona fide physical hedgers, not for speculators. The futures markets provide physical hedgers with two vital functions: price discovery and risk hedging. If we lose one or both of these vital functions, then physical hedgers will abandon the futures markets, and they will become little more than high-stakes casinos. In my written testimony, I discuss at length the mechanics of the price discovery function and the threat that excessive speculation poses to the commodities futures markets. Turning now to solutions. The time for studies is well past. Studies should be attempted prior to the adoption of new financial techniques, like the FDA does with new medicines, not after approval has been granted. First, do no harm, part of the Hippocratic Oath, is a concept that market regulators should take to heart. I read the discussion drafts introduced by Senators Lieberman and Collins on June 18th, and I believe they represent a substantial step in the right direction. I note that your three proposed pieces of legislation correspond generally to the first three steps that I am outlining here today. To the extent that they differ, please accept these differences as my suggestions on how to improve on these proposals. As a first step, I recommend that Congress convene a panel composed exclusively of physical commodity producers and consumers for every commodity. This panel will set reasonable speculative position limits in the spot month, as well as in all other individual months, and as an aggregate across all months. For commodities such as crude oil, where real limits, except for the last 3 days in an expiring contract, have been replaced by accountability limits, effective real limits must be reestablished. The commodities futures markets exist solely for the benefit of bona fide physical hedgers, so they are best qualified to set the limits. These physical market participants understand the benefits of liquidity and will do nothing to jeopardize their ability to hedge. The key here is that reasonable speculative limits allow the commodities futures markets to function properly. As part of this first step, speculative position limits must apply to every market participant, whether they access the futures markets directly or trade in the over-the-counter markets through swaps and other derivatives. This means effectively closing the swaps loophole and ensuring that position limits look through the swap transaction to the ultimate counterparty. It is essential that swaps dealers report all their positions to the CFTC so that positions can be aggregated at the control entity level for purposes of applying position limits. It potentially makes sense to require that all OTC transactions clear through the appropriate futures exchange. This makes monitoring and enforcement of limits much easier and would have the added benefit of strengthening the current system and making it more transparent. As a second step, Congress should instruct the same panel to define numerically exactly what constitutes excessive speculation based on a percentage of open interest. As an example, physical crude oil producers and consumers may decide that the crude oil futures markets should never be more than 35% speculative on a percentage of open interest basis. Next, the CFTC should be instructed to establish circuit breakers that adjust individual speculative position limits downward in order to prevent any commodity futures markets from reaching the overall limit established by the panel. These adjustments to individual limits should happen in a gradual fashion to minimize the impact on markets. The third step is to eliminate the practice of investing through passive commodity index replication. Because of the nature of passive indexing, index speculators have no sensitivity to supply and demand in individual commodities. The practice should be prohibited because of the damage that it does to the price discovery function. Congress should use any and all available means to do so. One potential avenue may be ERISA. Another avenue may be found in the Commodities Exchange Act, which states, quote, "Two or more persons acting pursuant to an express or implied agreement or understanding," unquote, should be subject to the speculative position limits of a single person. Since index speculators are all acting in express agreement by following the exact same index trading methodology, they should all be collectively subject to the speculative position limits of a single speculator. The CFTC could enforce this law tomorrow, and if they did, the amount of money allocated to index replication strategies would have to drop from roughly $260 billion to approximately $4 billion. Finally, Congress should actively investigate the practice of investors buying physical commodity inventories. It has come to my attention that some Wall Street banks are offering commodity swaps based on actual physical commodities. This is a distressing development because it means that investors are directly competing with American corporations and American consumers for limited natural resources. Before I conclude, let me say that many of the people who are profiting from the practices outlined in my testimony will try to scare you into believing that futures trading in U.S. commodities will simply move offshore. This is an empty threat. The United States is the largest consumer of energy in the world and the largest producer of food in the world. U.S. corporations and their non-U.S. trading partners are going to prefer U.S. regulated contracts with physical delivery points inside the United States. Today, without the critical mass of volume that the U.S. provides, it is very unlikely that any of the existing U.S. contracts would be able to successfully migrate overseas. The implementation of the solutions outlined in this testimony will greatly increase the confidence of market participants around the world that our futures contracts are an accurate reflection of true supply and demand fundamentals. This will lead to greater participation and ultimately further volume. This concludes my testimony.
Thanks again, Mr. Masters. Very helpful. Next is William F. Quinn, Chairman of American Beacon Advisors, which manages approximately $60 billion in pension assets and short-term cash assets on behalf of American Airlines and others. Previously, he served as president of the Beacon Advisors since its founding in 1986. Mr. Quinn, thanks for being here and bringing your unique perspective to this important question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Collins and other members of the committee. I am here today as the chairman of SEBA, and I thank you for providing us an opportunity to testify. We have submitted written testimony for the record but in the interest of time, I will summarize the key points of that testimony.
Mr. Quinn, excuse me, why don't you just indicate, I failed to do it, what CBA is?
Yes, the committee, CBER is the Committee on the Investment of Employee Benefit Assets. It's the voice of the Association of Financial Professionals on employee benefit plan asset management and investment issues for ERISA-governed plans. As the chief investment officers for most of the country's largest corporate pension plans, CBER members manage more than $1.5 trillion of defined benefit and defined contribution plan assets on behalf of 17 million plan participants and beneficiaries. According to Federal Reserve data, the $966 billion managed by CBER members in defined benefit plans represents 50% of all private defined benefit plan assets. The pension system has served millions of Americans for over a half a century. We owe it to working Americans and their families to ensure that any contemplated policy changes, no matter how well-intentioned, do not undermine retirement security. The record prices for food and energy in the U.S. and abroad are a great concern to all of us. We are sensitive to the need to investigate this critical problem. We need to understand the supply-demand imbalances, concerns over supply, the impact of the weaker dollar, and the impact of speculative investors. Nonetheless, we are deeply concerned about the prospect of any legislation that would bar pension plans from investing in certain types of assets. Congress has long recognized that direct government regulation of pension plan investments is ill-conceived. ERISA, the primary law that regulates the investment of pension assets, takes a very different tack. Rather than requiring or prohibiting specific investments, ERISA imposes rigorous fiduciary responsibilities on the persons that manage plan assets. These rules require a plan's fiduciary to act prudently and to diversify plan investments so as to minimize the risk of large losses. In addition, ERISA requires that a fiduciary act solely in the interest of plan participants and beneficiaries and for the exclusive purpose of providing benefits to plan participants. Today, private pension plans invest in a wide range of different asset classes, including equities, fixed income, emerging markets, real estate, private equity, and natural resources. Plan fiduciaries use a variety of investment techniques and tools, including derivative instruments, to mitigate risk and enhance return. Other countries have taken different approaches to the investment of pension plan assets. Historically, some U.S. public funds and some European defined benefit plans had rigid investment guidelines prohibiting certain types of investments while requiring others. Many of these rigid investment rules were eventually discarded because of the negative impacts such guidelines had on investment returns and thus on employees' retirement security. Put simply, mechanical approaches do not work as well as the American approach of investment flexibility paired with strict fiduciary responsibilities. It is critical that pension plans have the ability to invest in accordance with modern portfolio theory and pursue the best investment strategies available. The investment marketplace is constantly changing, and pension plans need to adapt and evolve accordingly without having to comply with a list of permitted and impermissible investments. Our concern is both with specific restrictions on pension plan investments in commodities, but also with the precedent that action will set for allowing the government to intrude on pension investments. Today, commodity investments are not a significant part of most private sector pension plans. Our preliminary survey of 2007 survey of CBER members shows that less than 1% of assets are invested directly in commodities and a similar amount in natural resources. Based on numbers that were given in testimony of commodity indexes of $260 billion, our members' investments represent about 1% of that total, so it's a very small amount. We firmly believe that commodities may be a part of a prudent, well-diversified investment portfolio by providing a hedge against inflation and minimizing volatility. But our primary concern is that the principle that the government should not micromanage pension plan investments. Pension plans are long-term investors, not speculators. The most successful plans do not chase returns. Rather, they have disciplined strategies for minimizing risk and enhancing returns so that the plan sponsor can fulfill the promise they make to their employees In fact, most plans will rebalance their investments periodically to assure they stay within their guidelines and not inadvertently get overexposed to a single asset class. Thus, we sell when prices are high and buy when they are low. Political temptation to intervene in pension fund investments is not unprecedented. Congress in the past has considered legislation that would bar plans from investing in particular investments or conversely would mandate particular investments. There are numerous instances where there has been a first instinct to require pension plans to make investment decisions with a view of promoting a particular social or political goal. Congress, however, has consistently rejected legislation that would subjugate the retirement security of millions of Americans and their families to other social or political concerns, no matter how worthy. In fact, when asked about the economically targeted investments, the Department of Labor interpretation said that a fiduciary must not subordinate the interests of participants and beneficiaries to unrelated objectives. Moreover, the case for limiting pension investments in commodities has simply not been made. As others, including the Commodities Future Trading Commission, have testified, it is far from clear that institutional investors in the commodity markets are driving the surging prices. Before acting, it is imperative that Congress step carefully and allow the CFTC to analyze the commodity markets and gather data. Regulating pension funds would make it difficult to adequately diversify investments, to hedge against market volatility and inflation, and consequently would put at risk the retirement funds of the very workers the proposal is intended to help. In effect, such a proposal will be a case of robbing Peter to pay Paul. Again, thank you for this opportunity to testify, and please let us know if there's any additional information you would need.
Thanks, Mr. Quinn. Next witness is James J. Angel, Associate Professor of Finance at the McDonough School of Business at Georgetown University. Dr. Angel's area of research focuses on the structure of financial markets, including the microstructure of trading, so he is well prepared to assist us in our deliberations today. Thanks for being here.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. It is a great honor to be here. We're in the midst of an economic crisis brought on by high energy and food prices. The potential for economic and social disruption is major, and it's very important that we deal with the problem. And I'm pleased that this committee is looking at several of these proposals. We can tell a couple of stories about the current high energy prices now. One story is that we're in the midst of a speculative bubble, that the same forces that brought us the internet and the housing bubble have turned onto commodities, and now we see a food and energy price and metal price bubble. On the other hand, maybe the markets are right. Maybe we have reached a point of peak oil, and maybe the markets are telling us that the value of another barrel of oil to our society really is $135 a barrel. Maybe, maybe not. The point is, markets have an incentive sooner or later to get to the right number. But if we are in the midst of a bubble, we have to ask ourselves, is there something in the design of our financial markets or in our government policies that is making the bubble worse, and what, if anything, should we do about it? I've been asked to look at the three proposals that have been put forth. The first two proposals basically extend the authority of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission over into the over-the-counter market. Now, there exist a lot of close substitutes for the regulated contracts that trade on our regulated markets. And I think it makes good common sense to extend CFTC authority into this area, because these close substitutes for the exchange-traded contracts do spill over into the regulated market. However, we have to be careful on how we do this, because the devil is in the details. In that, fortunately, I have a lot of respect for the CFTC and their capacities, and if we give them the resources they need, I think they will be able to exercise this new authority in a judicious manner. The third proposal is to ban institutional investment. Now, I'd like to point out that there are some good, legitimate economic reasons why institutions may wish to invest in commodities. Quite simply put, there is a historical tendency that when stocks go up, commodities go down, and when commodities go up, stocks go down. So by putting some commodities into your portfolio, you can smooth out returns. Now, this is very good for the pension plans and other investors who are trying to reduce the volatility for the workers who depend on their pensions. And indeed, if you use a standard asset allocation model with some plausible assumptions, you can come up with numbers of maybe 3 to 5% easily as a reasonable investment in commodities. Now, however, we need to be careful with the regulation because these are global markets and the threat of foreign substitutes is real. I visited over 50 stock and derivative exchanges around the world, and the foreign markets have invested heavily in technology. They're looking for new products, and they would just love the opportunity to snare business away from us. So if we do not impose new regulations in a judicious manner, if we do something crude and clumsy, all we will do is reduce the effectiveness of our markets and push the bad activity offshore into places that are less transparent and less easy to regulate. So we need to be very careful in how we do this. However, let's not get our hopes up. These proposals alone will not fix the problem. Energy markets have always gone from supply to glut with highly volatile prices. This has happened for over a century in the energy markets. And these proposals will not stop a global frenzy in commodity prices. What will bring prices down is a credible action by the United States that signals to the rest of the world that we are serious about transitioning away from imported petroleum. That if we can send a message to the rest of the world that we are going to move away from insecure, polluting fuels and become energy independent, then the producers of oil will have a going out of business sale and the prices will drop. However, we have to adopt credible energy policies that demonstrate to the rest of the world we are serious about moving away from petroleum. Those are my basic comments. I've got more technical comments about the proposals in my written comments. And with that, once again, I'd like to thank you for asking me to testify today.
Thanks very much, Dr. Angel. Stating for the record that the prepared testimony of all of you will be printed in the record as if it was read in full. And thanks to you for using 1 minute and 37 seconds less than you were allotted. Final witness is Michael Greenberger, professor of law at the University of Maryland, who was principal deputy associate attorney general at the Justice Department during the Clinton administration. Before that, he was director of the Division of Trading and Markets at the CFTC, where he was responsible for supervising exchange-traded futures and derivatives. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much, Chairman Lieberman. I think this is a market that I study a lot, and I think there have been 3 seminal events that have taught me an awful lot about this. I think 2 of those events were the reports issued from the Senate Permanent Investigating Subcommittee, one in June of 2006 when Senator Coleman was chair and Senator Levin was ranking member, and then one in June of 2007 when the positions were reversed. I said at the time when I testified on the June 2007 report that if you want to understand these markets, you must read that report. The third is the hearing you held on May 20th, which I think has become a turning point in convincing people that speculation is a problem and that we need to address it. I will tell you, I thought I knew a lot about these markets, but Mr. Masters educated me and I think a lot of people with his analysis of the treatment of index funds. I would say from the outset, and I mentioned this in my testimony, I'm perfectly prepared to discuss this, and I'm not going to assert it as a conclusion, but my view is that agricultural index funds are barred by the Commodity Futures Modernization Act. That statute clearly said we're going to deregulate everything, but not agriculture. I do not see how you can have agricultural index funds. There may be an argument that they're swaps, but my reading of that statute, and I'm perfectly prepared to have a discussion about it, is swaps can only be financial instruments. You can have energy swaps because energy was deregulated by the Enron loophole. And I believe that there are many people, attorney generals, and people who can bring private right of actions who are looking at that very question about whether these agricultural index funds are proper. Secondly, there are many legislative proposals, and I want to congratulate you and the ranking member for your 3 options. I want to address the issue about fiduciaries. Before the passage of the Commodity Futures Modernization Act, all energy futures had to be traded on a regulated exchange. That meant when an endowment or a pension fund or anybody else for that matter, whatever their fiduciary obligations, they had to meet the speculation limits of that exchange. It's not a substitute for fiduciary. They had to satisfy speculation limits. Why is that? As Mr. Masters said, these exchanges are not betting casinos. They're for commercials. The commercials can't use them anymore, but they were intended for commercials. Your heating oil dealers cannot use these exchanges. I'm sure they've told you that. They can't hedge. Exxon can't hedge anymore in these exchanges. Now, the reason that endowments or anybody else who was a speculator had limits was not to unhinge these commercial exchanges from supply-demand principles. In fact, in the Commodity Exchange Act, there's been little discussion that the CFTC has emergency powers to intervene when the markets do not reflect supply-demand principles to set spec limits and do other corrective things. One of the problems we have is because we freed up so much of this market from the CFTC's jurisdiction, they can't do that meaningfully because they can only go to NYMEX. My view is that I think there are a lot of important tools. I think speculation limits are probably, if you had to pick one, the most important tool. And I think the beauty of your option 1 is that you don't look to see whether the trading is done on a regulated exchange or on an over-the-counter market or an index fund. As I understand that legislation, someone who is not a true commercial hedger has a speculation limit. They can use it any way they want. They can put it all in index funds, they can put it in over-the-counter markets, or they can put it in NYMEX in case of energy, or the Chicago Board of Trade in the case of food. But just like we have a federal taxpayer identification number, people who want to speculate in these markets, which are supposed to be for commercials, will have limits across the board. So your option 1 doesn't require people to worry about what's over-the-counter, what's regulated, what's in London. As I understand it, if you're a United States citizen or trading in the United States, you would have a speculation limit. Option 2 has the markets impose on each contract, as I understand it, the amount that would be open to speculation. And I think that would be a very therapeutic approach, but the question you got to ask yourself, is Goldman Sachs going to create a speculation limit on energy index funds? Those are all for speculators. So I'm worried that when you say a contract market, are the index funds a contract market? And will Goldman Sachs or will the CFTC be assigning to Goldman Sachs for their agricultural index funds a speculation limit? If you do, I mean, you're essentially undercutting that market. Revert back to option 1. If everybody wants to use their speculation limits to go to Goldman Sachs, great. So as I see option 1 and option 2, option 1 gives the trader a spec limit. Option 2 requires the market to say how much of the market will be speculative. Option 3 is the absolute flat bar on pension funds in terms of what they can do in the futures markets, on sovereign wealth funds, and then an absolute bar on everybody. If you have over $1 billion in net worth, you cannot invest in an index fund. I am slightly troubled by that. I think that's going to be a very arbitrary thing to impose. And in that vein, I'm quite sympathetic to what the endowments are saying. You might have $1 billion and need a certain amount to hedge, and then you've got a market closed off to you. But I think these are all very interesting proposals. They've caused me to think very hard. I would look to option one as the way to go. I would also encourage you possibly to require the CFTC while option one is being taken care of, because everybody agrees we're in an emergency, that they use their emergency powers wherever they can on regulated exchange and over-the-counter markets. The principal over-the-counter market here is the ICE, which is all over the United States. They've got jurisdiction over it. They could go in with their emergency powers and set spec limits temporarily to deflame the speculation, assuming they agree that there is speculation. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Very interesting, helpful testimony. I think in light of the wide interest in this subject on the committee, I'm going to ask that we take a recess. Senator Collins and I agree. And ask the witnesses not to go far. We'll try to get over to the floor vote and come back real quickly, and then we'll begin the questioning. Thank you. The hearing stands in recess.
I think it gives, I mean, what we did is we're introducing the problem on the 20th. That's something else. But I would download the May 20th paper. It's just all you have to do is give it a master's testimony. And then this
And what's the thing that the CFTC keeps saying that's only private
My sense is pretty harsh.
because they can bring back the economy, the concept of
The hearing will reconvene. We'll do a 7-minute round of questions for each of the senators. I want to thank you again for being here, and I thought the opening panel was very helpful. Chairman Lucan, as I said before, we specifically want to invite your reaction to these 3 proposals or any others you'd make legislatively. And I'll give you that chance now, unless you're saying that you don't think we should do anything until, as Dr. Newsom said, there's further study. But we've got the extending the transparency to unregulated commodity markets, essentially by closing the so-called swaps loophole, creating a seamless system of speculative position limits applying to all commodity trading. And the third is the restriction on the investments of large institutional investors through index funds. Do you have an opinion you want to offer us about any or all of those 3 at this point?
Well, certainly, index fund, I think everybody can agree that there's been a large influx of index money coming into the markets. There's a wide range of what that might be, anywhere from estimates of $140 to $260 billion coming into the markets. So we're trying to get our arms around that, and that's why, but unfortunately this comes through swap dealers, which aren't directly bringing this money onto the market. They are offering swap contracts to these participants and then netting these instruments and bringing the residual risks to the market. So for us to understand exactly how much is coming into the market is very difficult. We're reaching beyond the futures markets to get this information, which traditionally we have not done. And so we've called, we're using our special calls to get this information. We're trying to unwind what these positions might be in terms of futures contracts. But I can tell you right now that swap dealers as a class are actually flat the market, or virtually flat the market. They have as many positions betting the markets will go down as would benefit from the markets going up. So we're trying to better understand this before we make hard and fast conclusions. I would say, though, on conceptually on your proposals, you've tried to address information needs and position limits where points of entry may come into the market, which is helpful. We've done this with exempt commercial markets, with the Farm Bill provisions, recently took steps to do this with foreign boards of trade markets, and we're looking into the swap dealer exemption to see whether we need to do this and position limits onto these into these traders as well.
Let me ask you this question. Since the law has established speculative position limits per entity, wouldn't you agree that these so-called swaps effectively end run that limit, and therefore that they're frustrating the intention of a previous Congress to try to limit the speculative positions of anybody sort of speculating in the commodities markets?
Well, this has been a policy of the CFTC to give exemptions to swap dealers since 1991. It was something in our reauthorization of 1986 that Congress encouraged us, urged us strongly, I think was the term, to look at exempting these type of risk management from our speculative limits.
But isn't it true? I understand the history here, but isn't it true that the sheer size of the trading and investing on through this loophole has grown enormously in recent years? I mean, all the evidence we've seen says that, and doesn't that cry out for some kind of remedy? I'm focusing on this first recommendation of ours, because to me it just looks like, again, people are, seeing their opportunities and taking advantage of them. There's nothing illegal that I can see about it, but it's frustrating what was clearly the intention of Congress.
Well, certainly we're looking in to see what's coming through swap dealers, and I think we're going to find a lot of commercial business. Legitimate hedgers are also coming through swap dealers, so we don't want to punish those people who are looking to manage risk in the markets. But if people are purposely evading speculative limits, if that could have gone directly to the markets and would have hit these limits, and they're purposely going through swap dealers, this is something we will have concern about and will take action against.
Let me ask you for a quick response to numbers 2 and 3. That is the coverage of all the speculative position limits, a kind of aggregate position limit that we would give you the opportunity to set.
Well, I think it'd be difficult just talking to staff of how we would police that. I mean, I understand the intent of trying to find optimal levels of speculation in the market.
Right. The intent is to try to protect the so-called commercial traders, the physical traders, the farmers, the fuel oil dealers for whom these markets were created, so they're not crowded out. They're now down to, about a quarter of the volume on the markets.
Well, certainly I understand the intent. For us, I'm not sure how we would police that, whether we would force people out of the markets every day that exceeded certain limits. So I think it's difficult to, A, determine what the optimal level would be, and B, how would you police these without government really putting a footprint on these markets. And so I think this would be difficult. I think the current authority of allowing position limits and accountability levels has been effective and would probably be a preferable method in my view.
Let me ask you a final question. If I have time, I'll ask Mr. Masters something. Do you think there is such a thing as excessive speculation? Because in your testimony, you focused on the power of the CFTC to deal with manipulation. But we're not really alleging that here. We're saying that speculation has become so dominant in the markets that it's having an artificial effect that is disastrous in raising consumer prices. So is there such a thing as excessive speculation?
I think you've put your finger on it. Our act and our mission has primarily been in the past to prevent illegal manipulation. This is a relatively new market structural issue that has developed over the last couple of years that we're trying to get our arms around. But theoretically, certainly, if markets are being artificially driven higher, excessive speculation can lead to that. I'm not sure that case has been proven, but it's certainly possible.
Okay, I'm glad you acknowledge that. I'm surprised at your answer that you're not sure there is excessive speculation. Let me ask Mr. Masters in the minute I've got left. Yesterday before the House Committee, you and two other witnesses, Fadl Geit, Managing Director, Senior Oil Analyst at Oppenheimer and Company, and Edward Crapels, a Special Advisor at the Consultant Energy Security Analysis, all said that if greater regulation over the speculation in energy prices, this was focused on, actually was adopted by Congress, implemented by the CFTC, there would be significant drops in crude oil prices, and the retail price of gasoline, it's now obviously over $4 a gallon, would follow suit. You indicated, and I quote, prices would probably drop over a reasonably short period of time back to somewhere closer to the marginal production cost of oil, $65 to $70, as compared to the $130 plus now. And I think gas prices would reflect that in a relatively short order. Mr. Geit said prices could come down to a range of $45 to $60 a barrel. And Mr. Crapel said, I don't think it would take 30 days after the president signed such a bill. It would happen more quickly than that. As soon as Congress passed it, commodity funds would withdraw their positions. Now, of course, that sounds great to not only us, but people who are suffering the consequences of the run-up, unbelievable, unprecedented run-up in prices. Why do you assert that with confidence, Mr. Masters, that there would be that significant a drop in retail prices if we regulated the speculative behavior in the commodity markets?
Thank you, Senator. I was referring, when I was testifying yesterday, to implementing the solutions that I described. If you take away one thing from the testimony today, I would take away the following suggestion, and that is that money moves prices. Money moves markets. So if you want to understand why markets are moving, follow the money. The key here is that there's no question that institutional investors from the capital markets have infiltrated the commodity futures markets through long-only strategies to the tune of new inflows of almost $170 billion, as of my testimony May 20th. When I testified about the $260 billion, that also included some price participation. But effectively, those new inflows of actual dollars have impacted the price, especially when you think about the fact that in 2003, the total open interest of all commodity futures was $180 billion. So you've had more money that's come in, or approximately the same amount of money that's come in the commodity markets, commodity futures markets, than you had total open interest in 2003. So we're not arguing that index speculators are the only reason that prices have gone up. But we are suggesting that they have greatly amplified a positive price trend, and they've contributed to greatly higher prices. And so what you've got here is supply and demand, and also demand, financial investor demand. So it makes a lot of sense to us, if you take away that financial demand, that you're going to bring down prices, because you're going to bring down total demand. And that's why we made the statement we did yesterday.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm over my time. Senator Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Newsom, you indicated that the development of an overseas look-alike to the NYMEX West Texas Intermediate Crude Oil contract had made about a third of that market non-transparent to the CFTC and, quote, permitted an easy avenue to circumvent position limits designed to prevent excessive speculation. Two questions for you. First, do you think that the changes that the CFTC recently announced address that problem adequately of the lack of transparency? And second, do you believe that excessive speculation did in fact occur because of the lack of transparency in those markets?
Senator, the answer to the first question is yes, we do believe that the actions the CFTC has taken adequately address our concerns. At the same time, we're certainly not opposed to the Congress codifying those actions. Secondly, with regard to whether or not that activity did lead to price increases through speculation, I don't know the answer to that. And that's why we wanted those markets made transparent, so those positions could be seen and that determination made.
Professor Greenberger, some experts have estimated that excessive speculation in the futures market has driven up the price of oil by as much as a third. Do you have an estimate of what you think the impact has been?
Senator Collins, I do.
Press the button.
I do.
We all want to hear this.
Well, I do have an estimate, but I'm not an economist, and I was a regulator, and in my bones I know that these things are happening in these the Intercontinental Exchange, which you've referred to as overseas, and I believe is the United States Exchange. They've got all their indicia in the United States, and I think we make a terrible mistake to keep calling it a British exchange when it's running Atlanta, trading engines in Chicago, and has 30% of the competitive contract that Mr. Newsom has. So in my bones, I know not only there is excessive speculation, and I know you said you're not addressing manipulation, but I can tell you, even in the regulated markets, we worry about manipulation. I would guess 25 to 50%, but the people I would look to are the people who testified in the first panel in the House yesterday, who are mostly trained economists or experts in these oil markets. And if I remember the thesis, there is, at a minimum, it would go back down to $80 a barrel. That's what OPEC estimates it should be at. So it's 135 now. Saudi just announced they're going to put more in. Oil went up yesterday.
Thank you. Just so I'm clear, I can assure you that we're all concerned about price manipulation as well as excessive speculation. One thing that I would hope that everyone ought to be able to agree on is that there should be transparency on all the markets. I agree with you that if